San Diego's waterfront recently served as the public stage for a moment that captured the magnitude of the cartel fight in raw numbers. 18,900 pounds of cocaine worth an estimated $214 million stacked in bales and offloaded by the U.S. Coast Guard. This image shocked observers because of its sheer scale. Nearly 9.5 tons of narcotics were seized in a single, dominant operation, denied entry into the bloodstream of America. This was not just another bust. It was one of the largest maritime interdictions in recent memory. It was a body blow to the networks that rely on the ocean as their trafficking highway. The volume alone is almost difficult to process. At street level, $214 million worth of cocaine means power, influence, and bloodshed. But law enforcement removed all of it from circulation in one coordinated strike. This was not merely a symbolic victory. It was a direct disruption of cartel logistics and an interruption of their business model. The Coast Guard operation highlighted how cartels had adapted to global shipping routes, making the Pacific Ocean a corridor for smuggling multi-ton loads of cocaine from South and Central America northward. The operation: exposure of adversary weakness. Intercepting these shipments requires intelligence, surveillance, and readiness to strike when smugglers least expect it. The public offloading of 18,900 pounds in San Diego made visible what is normally hidden. It showed the invisible war being fought on open waters, far from public view, where drugs are stopped before they ever reach U.S. borders. What made this seizure so dominant was not only its size, but how it compared to other drug confiscations. Cocaine shipments often appear in the thousands of pounds, but rarely at this magnitude. By contrast, fentanyl busts are measured in smaller weights, though with exponentially greater lethality. For example, the DEA's 2025 record-setting fentanyl bust involved 400 kilograms of counterfeit pills, the largest in its history. While 400 kilograms of fentanyl can kill millions due to its potency, the nearly 19,000 pounds of cocaine represents a different threat: volume, reach, and sheer market flooding potential. These two seizures together show the spectrum of danger: fentanyl as a weapon of mass overdose, and cocaine as the engine of cartel economies. The emotional stakes of this successful operation come into focus when considering what would have happened had it slipped through. $214 million in cocaine funneled into U.S. streets translates into countless overdoses, spikes in violent crime, and the expansion of cartel dominance in local markets. Every gram that hits the streets feeds demand, fuels addiction, and ties communities into cycles of desperation. This Coast Guard haul is not just about dollars confiscated, it is about lives not destroyed, families not pulled into collapse, and neighborhoods not consumed by the fallout of an oversaturated cocaine market.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
Maritime interdictions are among the most dangerous and complex missions in the fight against cartels. Smugglers often use semi-submersible vessels, fishing boats, or commercial shipping containers, attempting to blend into legitimate maritime traffic. Coast Guard crews operate under high risk, approaching potentially armed traffickers in international waters and boarding vessels where danger can erupt instantly. When a seizure this massive occurs, it underscores both the peril faced by agents and the sophistication of the surveillance that successfully tracked the shipment. San Diego has served as a symbolic front line, a place where the public sees in real terms what the invisible war at sea produces. Pallets of cocaine stacked like bricks, guarded by uniformed officers, is an image designed not only to inform, but to remind Americans that every ton seized is a ton that will not fracture communities inland. The humiliation of adversaries. The loss of drugs worth $214 million publicly embarrasses cartel financiers and planners, primarily by exposing their massive, costly failures in smuggling operations. Cartels invest heavily in meticulously planning, financing, and laundering drug shipments. When such a large shipment is seized, it signals a significant operational breakdown that undermines their reputation for control, secrecy, and success. The unforgettable image is of pallets stacked high with shrink-wrapped bricks of narcotics flanked by grim-faced agents and flashing cameras. The $214 million dollar figure slices through the heart of cartel financiers and planners. That number is not just a loss on paper, it represents trust shattered, reputation shredded, and a glaring signal that something went catastrophically wrong in an operation meant to be airtight. Cartels operate like multinational corporations, with every major shipment having backers, investors, and logistics experts. Financiers funnel capital into production, transport, and laundering schemes, expecting healthy returns. Planners build the routes, recruit the couriers, and design layers of concealment. Each shipment is supposed to be a showcase of control, precision, and mastery over risk. Losing $214 million worth of product in one strike screams incompetence. And in the underworld, incompetence equals humiliation. For financiers, the embarrassment is direct and devastating. Wiring millions into a shipment and then watching the entire investment displayed on national television as evidence is a reputational collapse. Other launderers and investors hesitate to tie their money to a failing operation. Rivals whisper that the financier cannot deliver. This kind of public failure can freeze cash flow overnight because credibility drives trust in cartel economics. For planners and logisticians, humiliation cuts in a different way. Their currency is operational genius, the ability to design smuggling routes that slip past borders and scanners. A $214 million seizure obliterates that aura. Suddenly, what was pitched as an ingenious plan is revealed as a glaring vulnerability. Was the concealment flawed? Or worse, was there a leak? Every answer points to failure. In the cartel hierarchy, planners who fail risk losing their positions, influence, and lives. The humiliation multiplies because these failures are public. Cartel leaders might tolerate private losses as a cost of business, but when shipments are laid out for the world to see, humiliation radiates outward. Rivals seize on it, mocking the organization's weakness. Law enforcement amplifies it, portraying the bust as proof of dominance. Governments broadcast it to reassure the public. Even allies within the cartel structure downgrade their faith in leadership. A public embarrassment is corrosive, while a private loss is survivable. Reputation is everything in the drug trade. Cartels project invincibility to intimidate rivals, secure loyalty, and maintain corrupt partnerships. A $214 million seizure cracks that facade, showing law enforcement can penetrate secrecy, intercept shipments, and dismantle operations once thought secure.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
The humiliation lingers, creating a doubt that is lethal. If the cartel could lose this, what else could collapse? The humiliation also ripples through relationships with corrupt officials. When a shipment of this magnitude is seized, suspicion follows. Corrupt partners fear exposure, and their confidence erodes. With it, the cartel's ability to rely on them. Public failure poisons the very lifelines that cartels depend on. Financially, the loss is staggering. That capital, including sunk costs in logistics, payments to growers and chemists, vehicles, storage, and bribes, vanishes instantly, forcing the organization to scramble. The humiliation is inseparable from the financial pain, because failing to protect profit is the ultimate disgrace in cartel culture. The psychological dimension is equally brutal. Paranoia spikes within the cartel ranks. Suspicion metastasizes, breeding distrust and infighting. The humiliation of losing face publicly now turns into fear of betrayal privately. The pressure on cartel leaders is suffocating. They are trapped in a dilemma: absorb the shame and lose credibility, or lash out and invite intensified crackdowns. Law enforcement understands this dynamic, which is why they stage public displays. Humiliation is a weapon. By stacking bricks of seized drugs and attaching a precise dollar figure, They do not just remove narcotics, they shatter the myth of cartel control. The seizure becomes both a tactical success and a psychological strike, with humiliation as the shrapnel that spreads farthest. To rivals, the seizure is an invitation. A cartel that loses $214 million in product looks weakened and exposed. Competitors circle, eager to poach routes, corrupt partners, or disillusioned associates. Public humiliation thus breeds predation, as rivals exploit the weakness to expand their own influence. Losing market position because rivals sense weakness is catastrophic. Humiliation even infects cartel propaganda. The cartel cannot easily spin $214 million of drugs sitting in government warehouses as a victory, and the narrative cracks. For financiers and planners, there is no silver lining. Public loss means money gone, credibility shredded, and rivals emboldened. A $214 million loss is a scar etched onto the cartel's identity, visible to allies and enemies alike. For financiers, it brands them unreliable. For planners, it exposes them as fallible. For the cartel as a whole, it punctures the illusion of dominance. The essence of the humiliation lies in exposure. Cartels thrive in shadows, but seizures drag their failures into daylight. That exposure robs financiers of secrecy, planners of prestige, and the cartel of its aura of control. Consequences and strategic dominance. A massive loss, like the $214 million cocaine seizure, is a significant financial shock that contributes to the gradual unraveling of a cartel's U.S. operations, though it is unlikely to cause a sudden collapse by itself. Large drug seizures disrupt cash flow, reduce drug availability on the streets, and force cartels to reroute or halt shipments, all of which strain their logistics and finances. This loss erodes the cartel's ability to pay operatives, corrupt officials, and fund new shipments, leading to operational disruptions. When federal authorities intercepted the cocaine, they delivered a direct strike to cartel balance sheets. Cocaine at this scale is capital, payroll, bribery funds, and expansion fuel. Losing it overnight is like a multinational corporation losing a year's revenue. This financial wound bleeds into every layer of the organization, shaking its stability from the inside out. Cartels thrive on velocity. Drugs move fast, money circulates faster. Every shipment feeds a cycle of payments and reinvestment. A $214 million seizure stops that cycle cold. Without that cash, promises go unkept, bribes dry up, and paychecks to street-level distributors stall. Even armed enforcers, operating on loyalty, bought with stacks of cash, begin questioning their commitments. Missed payments corrode the cartel's authority in a business where reputation is survival. Such a massive seizure also strains supply on the streets. When one of the largest shipments is intercepted, dealers downstream suddenly face shortages. Local distributors must raise prices, dilute purity, or fight competitors over dwindling supplies. The ripple effect creates tension at the street level, where violence is a predictable byproduct. The loss of a shipment is a logistical breakdown. Safe houses, transport trucks, port workers, and corrupt insiders were all part of the chain that failed. The cartels must rebuild trust and reestablish secure corridors, which takes time and money. Each rerouted shipment adds cost, delay, and risk. The bust is a disruption that forces cartels to gamble with new, less secure networks. Beyond economics and logistics, the seizure delivers symbolic humiliation. The reputation of cartels rests on being untouchable, but losing a headline-making load punctures that image. Rivals gloat, subordinates question leadership, and potential recruits hesitate. This reputational damage is devastating. The cartel must respond with displays of strength, which, however, carry risks that can further expose them to law enforcement. Despite the scale of the loss, cartels are resilient organisms. They do not shatter from a single blow. They bend, adapt, and reconfigure. When one shipment disappears, they divert others. When one leader falls, another steps in. Their decentralized networks ensure that even catastrophic losses can be absorbed. This is why law enforcement warns against premature victory laps. Seizures are victories, but not finales. Cartels build redundancy into their systems precisely to survive shocks like these. Still, the seizure sets conditions for deeper unraveling if it is part of sustained pressure. When seizures are combined with mass arrests, leadership takedowns, financial crackdowns, and intelligence-driven operations, the cracks widen. Without money, cartels cannot recruit replacements. Without leaders, coordination falters. Without laundering channels, drug money clogs the system. The $214 million bust is a massive stone thrown into the pond. The ripples grow when paired with other strikes, such as arrests of operatives in U.S. cities, dismantling of laundering networks, and exposure of smuggling corridors. Drug cartels rely on sophisticated financial pipelines to legitimize dirty money, but seizures of this magnitude highlight vulnerabilities in those pipelines. Launderers are forced to move money faster, take bigger risks, and sometimes abandon entire channels. Each disruption increases costs and limits the cartel's flexibility. Starved of liquidity, cartels face the corporate equivalent of a credit crunch: less money to buy security, fewer resources to replace losses. Inside the cartel, rank-and-file operatives feel the pressure most. A seizure that strips hundreds of millions from leadership trickles down as missed payments, harsher working conditions, and rising suspicion. Paranoia grows, and in an ecosystem built on fear and money, the erosion of either destabilizes morale. Disloyalty and desertion begin to surface, leaving cracks in the cartel's manpower. For communities in the US, the bust is a temporary reprieve. Less cocaine on the streets means fewer overdoses, fewer violent turf wars, and fewer young recruits drawn into trafficking. However, the relief is fragile because cartels adapt quickly. Experts emphasize sustained enforcement and intelligence work. Without it, the $214 million victory becomes a blip rather than a turning point. History reinforces that major seizures have rarely toppled cartels outright. Cumulative pressure, such as the combination of eradication, enforcement, and extraditions against cartels like Medellin and Cali, is what succeeds. It was never one raid or one arrest. It was a campaign. The $214 million seizure fits into this blueprint, a critical strike that matters most when followed by many more. The seizure is a warning shot, proving cartels are not invincible. But it also warns authorities that single victories, no matter how monumental, are insufficient. To truly unravel cartel operations, the momentum must be sustained. More financial seizures, more leadership arrests, and more laundering networks dismantled. If these align, the cartel's U.S. operations could stagger, falter, and then collapse. Without continuity, the organization calibrates and marches on, bloodied but unbroken. The seizure is a blow and a test. A blow because it cuts deeply into cartel logistics, finances, and reputation. A test because it asks whether law enforcement can follow through with sustained, coordinated action that turns disruption into dismantlement. Alone, the seizure is a headline. Together with continued pressure, it is the start of unraveling. The cartel's weakness lies in attrition, and this bust proves attrition is possible. Whether it becomes decisive depends on what comes next. The breaking of the cartel. Myth observers interpret such a record loss by the cartel as a strong indication of weakness rather than mere recklessness or desperation. Experts note that public, large-scale drug seizures expose vulnerabilities in the cartel's operations that were once considered impregnable, signaling cracks in their logistical control and intelligence security. The news of a record-breaking cartel drug seizure exposed a rupture in an empire that had built its reputation on being untouchable. Cartels thrive on projecting invincibility, and every time a mountain of their drugs is paraded on camera by federal agents, that image fractures. For observers, the loss is not written off as a single failed gamble. It is read as weakness, structural, operational, and psychological, the very kind that cartels fight desperately to hide. Cartels have built their power on a myth of control, cultivating the idea that their logistics ran with military precision and their intelligence networks were sharper than the states trying to dismantle them. A record seizure punctures that myth. Drugs worth millions do not simply vanish into government warehouses by accident. They are lost because shipments are traced, routes are infiltrated, and insiders are compromised. Every loss broadcasts a simple, brutal truth. The cartel is not as secure as it pretends. Within cartel culture, respect and fear hinge on the ability to deliver. When a shipment the size of a small nation's GDP disappears, it is not just money gone. It is credibility evaporated, both inside the organization and in the eyes of rivals. For a cartel, image is currency. The aura of invulnerability is how leaders keep lieutenants loyal and rivals intimidated. The spectacle of a record loss humbles that image. Soldiers and affiliates begin whispering about mistakes. Rivals interpret the failure as opportunity, and communities that once bowed in silence see cracks in the facade of power. Fear is replaced by the possibility of resistance. While some frame these losses as recklessness, seasoned observers point deeper. Recklessness often stems from pressure. Intensified enforcement, improved intelligence sharing, and more aggressive interdiction force cartels to take greater risks. Smaller loads get intercepted, cash reserves thin, and desperation pushes leaders to roll the dice on larger, riskier shipments. What looks like careless bravado is, in reality, a response to tightening nooses. The repetition of such losses underscores this desperation. Desperation leaks through, cash flow erodes, payoffs shrink, and violence escalates not out of dominance, but out of fragility. The cartel is growing reckless because it is cornered. Money is the bloodstream of cartel survival. Every shipment seized is not only product gone, but capital evaporated. Massive seizures choke that stream, and when billions are lost, operational pressure mounts. Leaders scramble and resort to more dangerous financial maneuvers. But at its core, every loss is a budget crisis. And in organized crime, budget crises trigger instability that even brutality cannot fully mask. Large-scale seizures also expose gaps in cartel intelligence. When record shipments fall into federal hands, it signals breakdowns in those very systems. It means wiretaps were not detected, informants were not neutralized, and routes were not secure. For rivals, that weakness is gold. For members inside, it sows paranoia. Trust corrodes, and fear of infiltration spreads faster than orders from the top. Observers outside the cartel ecosystem interpret these record losses as turning points. They argue that each major seizure is a symptom of effectiveness, proof that sustained enforcement is working. Communities suffering cartel violence cling to these moments as evidence that the giant can bleed. The symbolism is potent. Pallets of narcotics displayed under armed guard, proving that the cartel's reach is not limitless. That spectacle fuels public support for continued enforcement, reinforcing the cycle of pressure that squeezes cartels tighter. Inside the criminal underworld, weakness is never ignored. Rivals interpret record losses as windows of opportunity. Competitors push harder into contested routes and probe for takeover chances. This destabilizes hierarchies and fuels fresh conflict. The perception of weakness can trigger wars as bloody as the profits they chase. The psychological toll inside cartel ranks is just as corrosive. Massive failures undermine the belief that leadership can protect them and guarantee steady income. Morale dips, recruitment slows, and paranoia grows. A culture built on mythic strength cannot withstand repeated humiliation without consequences. Each public loss is not just cargo gone, but confidence shattered. Experts stress that one record seizure alone does not collapse a cartel, but patterns matter. Repeated seizures combined with leadership arrests, extraditions, financial blockades, and community resistance accumulate into systemic stress. Cartels are adaptive, but they are not indestructible. Sustained pressure erodes the very systems they rely on. Observers recognize these cracks not as random, but as cumulative proof that enforcement, when relentless, works. This is the essence of the drug war's current stage: attrition. Every loss chips away at the cartel's armor, and every pallet displayed in a government press conference is a symbolic dent in their myth. They are bleeding money, losing face, and scrambling to adapt. Weakness accumulates like rot inside a fortress wall. In the end, a record cartel loss is more than a statistic. It is a crack in a wall that once looked unbreakable. Observers interpret it not as an isolated failure, but as a symptom of deeper weakness. It signals financial strain, operational vulnerability, and the erosion of a fear-based image. It reveals desperation born of sustained enforcement. And it proves, most importantly, that these organizations are not immortal. They can be hurt, humbled, and weakened. For communities living in their shadow, that realization is the most powerful weapon of all. The knowledge that the myth of invincibility is just that, a myth waiting to be shattered again. This takedown was just the start. The fight isn't finished. On your screen is the next video. Click the video, it opens right away, and you'll see the cartels crushed even harder.